Hi, I'm Walter T. Richardson. T is for Thomas. I was born July the 2nd, 1948 in Christian Hospital at 2:01 p.m. Dr. Sawyer was my doctor. He was the first Black OBGYN in Dade County. It was he and his family that actually opened up the first practice because most of the children that were born during that time had midwives. He came here, and I think in the late 30s, about the same time that Liberty City was actually built, and began his practice in Miami, Florida. My parents are from North Carolina. My dad and mom moved here. My dad moved first. He had left college to follow his uncle here in ministry. My great uncle was a church planter for the Church of God. My dad and my dad's uncle, who was the pastor of the church, were very religious, and I was raised in a very religious environment. All of my friends, all of my dad's friends, and all the families that associated with us were all very religious, very close-knit. We knew we were dealing with a community that was very close, necessarily because this is during a time of deep segregation. As a small child coming up, I knew that there were certain places I could sit and certain places I was prohibited from sitting. I knew there were water fountains where I wasn't afforded the opportunity to drink just from what was available. I had to be told, that's your fountain. Drink from the one that says colored. I learned to read very early. I was one of the first students at Holmes Elementary right down the street. They opened in 1954. The Brown versus Board of Education had just been rendered, and this school was already in the works. And so I was one of the first students there in 1954. Housing became available for Blacks. There was Ralph Bunche, who had become very famous as a Black man in government. And so the area where my family moved was called Bunche Park. You know, in 1963, the March on Washington ensued. I was still in high school. I was 15 years old when the March on Washington ensued. I still remember what I had on because it was a big day in my life and the life of those that I was with. Had on my red bandolon shirt and my blue seersucker pants. And and I remember being out in the sun listening to all these very famous and powerful speakers. During the time we were paying a lot of attention, we decided as a family, as a community really, to be very involved in civil rights. One of the things that happened in 1963 with the March on Washington was that there were hundreds of thousands of people in DC. The numbers impacted some of the outcomes. And so it's been a strategy of my family to make sure that when we got involved in something, particularly those efforts that had to do with civil rights, that we got the numbers. So sometimes numbers make a difference. Sometimes one makes a difference, you know, just having that presence there, which is what I try to pass on to my chaplains who work with me with the police department. Sometimes it's not what you do, it's just being there. It's called the ministry of presence. Sometimes it's good just to have the ministry of presence, but there are times when you have to have the ministry of numbers. When we all show up. You say, why are they here? There must be something going on. They pay attention because those are votes to politicians. They see numbers. They see power. Lyndon Baines Johnson was in office right after the assassination of John Kennedy. And he came to Miami. The Northwestern Band played behind him. And it was right here. And it was sponsored by the YMCA. They were very involved. And my dad was very involved in the YMCA, the NAACP. I got my first car when I was 14, the year before March on Washington. So we were very involved in civil rights. And we thought we needed to push, not just let things happen, but be the people that would make things happen. And we were not afraid. We got very involved. The church was the gathering place. It's the one that had credibility. Quote unquote, well-meaning people gathered at churches, you know. When I became a pastor and we moved to our largest location, politicians can come and worship with us. And I would recognize them, but they never got the microphone. That's not what we were there for. We were there for worship. However, the Black church remains the most powerful force in America. And there have been so many who have taught and preached social justice. It's from the pulpit. When you take the Bible and you make it contemporary to the issues that are affecting the people that you serve. That's the way I preached. That's the way I preach now. But I think because I was groomed around my dad, who was involved in civil rights and activism, my great uncle, who was an activist, my aunts, who were activists, kind of invoked in me the spirit of activism. And so even when I became the pastor, having been mentored by John Ferguson, who was the pastor at Second Baptist, he saw in me what I didn't even see in myself. He says, you were a leader, and I'm going to do all I can to help you with this. And so he pushed me way out front. He had been a member of desegregation efforts here in Dade County, and he saw me in that role. Here's what my pastor said, John Ferguson. He says, my gift is I know how to work like a termite. I will never forget that. He says, I do termite work. He says, you'll never see me in the community giving speeches and standing up and making fuss. I do termite work. That's what John Ferguson said to me. Termites are always at work, but you don't see it until the house comes down. And then someone say, this house had termites. He says, and that's how I work. He says, I do most of my work on the telephone. I pick up the phone, I call a commissioner. I pick up the phone, I call a mayor. I pick up the phone, I call a rabbi when there's a concern about relations between blacks and Jews. I pick up the phone, I call. I do termite work. And that's how I'm working in and around Dade County. He would tell me sometimes tearfully, and I'm about to choke up, that I won't be around always. There needs to be someone who I can hand this baton off to, and you are my best. He says, go back to school. He wanted me to get my theology degree. Go back to school. You've done well in music, you've done well in everything else, but go back to school. And he would say it this way, get your stuff together. And what he meant by that, get everything you need, educationally and otherwise, so that when duty calls, you're able to respond, being prepared. And John Ferguson planted that in me. He worked with my dad. My dad was not as vocal as John Ferguson was. John Ferguson was a pusher, and he pushed me out front. He made me join the Community Relations Board. He made me join. He mentioned to the leader of that organization, I got a young man who's taken my place, and y'all work with him. Make him work. And I did that. And I ended up being the chairman of the board for the Community Relations Board. I've never been a watcher. I've always been a doer. But at that level, this was new. This was all new landscape. I ended up being one of the few black people to be on the Miami-Dade College Board of Trustees. I was named by Lawton Childs. There have been positions, and appointments after appointments because somebody saw something in me, many times that I did not see in myself. I didn't push myself out front. There's never been a position that I've had in my time in public service where I've had to ask for it. It's always been offered to me, and I've had the privilege of saying, I'm too busy or whatever, but I've never sought office. Right now, I sit on the board, the Jackson Hospital Board. I'm on that board. I'm on the Public Health Trust. I'm the only black. I'm the chairman. And I see my role as being very important to make sure that there's equity and equality in everything that we do at Jackson. Equity and equality in everything that we do, that no one is overlooked. Since I've been a part of the Jackson board, we've made sure that we have had the tough conversations about race and gender and equity and equality. Every member, all 14,000 employees got exposed to the conversation and had a way to chime in. We did this 2 years ago, and we had that conversation. I would tell you that it's helped immensely. And I've asked other organizations, which I belong, that are not all black, to have similar conversations. And I think if we do this one at a time, with those places where we have impact, those places where we have influence, if we share that message with everyone who's marginalized, to let them know that they're not alone, that we have the same story, and we have to employ the same methods so that we're helping each other to gain equity and equality. We're sitting in a building that was built in the 40s. Across the street, simultaneous to this being built, were the Liberty City housing projects. They were built in 1938, if my memory serves me correctly. When I look across the street now, there's nothing left of that 1938 housing project. If I had anything to do with that, I would have saved a portion of Liberty City, of what we call the projects. Our history is being intentionally erased. And until the story is told, the complete story, I see efforts to eliminate the story. I see efforts at local levels, public school education, of eliminating and time to disregard. That bothers me. And these efforts are allowed to fester. We have a very grim future. Know your story. Know your story. You may not ever have to use it, but know your story.